My son, Brian, hadn't spoken to me for 2 weeks after our last argument, so when I finally decided to drive across town to his place in Portland, I was carrying more worry than I'd admit. The Oregon rain had just let up, leaving the streets shiny and smelling of wet cedar. When I pulled up outside his apartment building, my heart hammered in my chest. I hadn't seen Brian this silent since he was a teenager sulking over missed curfews. I walked up to his door and knocked, half hoping he'd fling it open and put an end to my worrying. But nothing. The blinds were down. No lights inside. I circled around, found a side window that looked onto his living room, and peered in through the glass. What I saw stopped me cold. My knees wobbled, my hand clutching the sill for balance. Brian was there all right, but he wasn't alone. He was pacing, wild-eyed, around his coffee table, talking to a man I didn't recognize, a burly guy in a work shirt, tattoo sleeves snaking down his arms. Their voices were muffled, but even through the window, I could feel the tension. I pressed my ear closer, the cold glass fogging with my breath. "Friday's perfect," Brian said, running a shaky hand through his hair. "He never misses the gym, leaves the house at 2, gone for almost 2 hours. That's when we do it. No one will be around." The big man, whose voice was as rough as gravel, replied, "You sure about the cash? It's really there?" Brian nodded, eyes darting around the room. 43 grand stashed under the basement floorboards. I watched him check it all the time when I was a kid. It's there. My chest clenched. That money, my emergency fund, built over a lifetime with my late wife, was our security, not something to be thrown away. But it was the next words that cut deepest. "Don't worry," Brian said. "The old man is predictable. He leaves the spare key under the garden gnome. He's done it since I was little. They were planning to rob me, my own son, and a stranger who looked like he belonged in a mugshot lineup." I stumbled away from the window, hands shaking, heart thudding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. I never thought I'd see the day my only child would plot to steal from me, much less with the kind of cold calculation I'd just witnessed. It felt like all the years of teaching him right from wrong, working late, missing vacations, tucking him in at night after my wife died, had evaporated in an instant. Back at my car, I sat in the driver's seat staring at the steering wheel, the weight of betrayal settling over me like a heavy coat. All the warning signs I'd brushed aside, Brian's desperate calls for loans, the expensive shoes he wore even as he begged for rent money, his wild investment schemes, suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I scrolled through the photos on my phone. There was Brian as a boy, holding his first baseball glove, grinning at me with a gap-toothed smile. There was my wife, Julie, standing behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her eyes full of pride and patience. Julie always said, "Don't give him everything, Tom. He needs to learn the value of working for it." She'd been gone 5 years now, cancer taking her in the end, but her words echoed in my head. Had I failed to teach him enough? Was I too soft when he came to me for help? Or had something inside him just changed, a switch flipped by disappointment or bitterness I'd never seen coming? The night air was cold, but my mind was hotter than a furnace. I didn't sleep much when I finally made it home. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of whine through the pine outside, felt like a warning. I kept replaying what I'd seen and heard, trying to convince myself it had been a bad dream. But I knew what I had to do. For 40 years, I'd built a life on trust, honesty, and hard work. I wasn't about to let all that be destroyed in a single afternoon, not by my own flesh and blood. And so, with trembling hands, I made my plan. If Brian wanted to test how far a father's love could be stretched, he was about to learn it could also become steel. That night, I lay awake in my bed, the city lights of Portland flickering through the slats in the blinds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brian's anxious face behind that living room window, heard his voice plotting my downfall with a stranger. I thought of calling the police right then. I even picked up my phone, but my hand wouldn't stop shaking. Was I really ready to send my son to jail? Julie's voice came to me again, steady and wise. Do what's right, Tom, not what's easy. I stared at the ceiling, my old heart pounding out a rhythm of dread and resolve. I realized I had 6 days before Friday, 6 days until Brian and his new friend would try to take everything I'd worked for. I decided I wouldn't just sit back and wait. If they wanted to turn this into a game, I'd show them how it's played. Before sunrise, I made a strong pot of coffee and opened my laptop. I researched home security systems, cameras, alarms, motion sensors, every gadget I could find that a retired electrician could install. The reviews blurred together, but one thing was clear: I needed something fast, quiet, and effective. After 2 hours of reading and phone calls, I settled on a wireless system I could pick up at the local electronics store. The cameras would stream live video straight to my phone and save all footage to the cloud. By noon, I was in my dusty blue Ford pickup heading to Best Buy. The young man in the store looked at me like I was buying a spaceship, but he didn't ask questions. "That's top of the line, sir," he said, scanning the cameras. "You'll see everything, day or night." "That's the idea," I replied. I spent the rest of the day installing the cameras around my old house on Willow Street. One on the porch to catch anyone at the front door. Another in the kitchen, facing the back door where Brian had said they'd enter. A third pointed at the basement steps. The fourth and final camera watched the furnace and the loose floorboards. My hidden treasure, the reason for this whole mess. By sundown, I was exhausted but satisfied. My phone buzzed every time the cameras detected motion. I tested the system by walking from room to room, watching my own gray-haired reflection flicker on the screen. The house felt safer, but the sense of betrayal still lingered like a stubborn ache. That night, I called my old friend Walter, a retired police officer who'd known me and Julie since our kids were in diapers. I kept my voice steady, but Walter could hear the storm brewing underneath. "Walt, I need your advice. What would you do if your boy was planning to rob you?" He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "You've got to protect yourself, Tom. Sometimes the hardest thing a father can do is teach his son a lesson. But you can't let him destroy your life." We talked through the details: how to document everything, how to contact the police without tipping off Brian. Walter promised to talk to a detective he trusted, someone who'd handle things right. Over the next few days, I acted as if nothing had changed. I went to my regular breakfast spot on Hawthorne Avenue, chatted with the neighbors while mowing my lawn, even dropped off a pie at the church bake sale. But inside, I was a knot of nerves, always checking my phone, watching for any sign that Brian or his accomplice had decided to move early. On Thursday night, I heard a noise outside. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There was Brian's silver Toyota parked across the street. He sat in the driver's seat, staring at my house, his face pale in the glow of his dashboard. He didn't get out, didn't knock, just sat there for nearly half an hour. Then, as quietly as he'd come, he drove away into the wet night. I barely slept after that. I double-checked the cameras, replayed every conversation in my mind, prayed for a sign that things would turn out all right. The next morning, the day of the planned robbery, I woke up before dawn. I packed my gym bag as usual, drove to the fitness center at exactly 2 o'clock, like clockwork, just as Brian predicted. But I wasn't there to lift weights. I parked at the back and sat in my truck, my phone in hand, watching for camera feeds in real time. If my son was going to betray me, I'd make sure there was no way for him to lie his way out of it this time. Friday afternoon in Portland can feel slow, like the whole city is dragging its heels into the weekend. But for me, every minute ticked by with the weight of a lifetime. I sat in the cab of my pickup behind the gym, my gym bag unopened on the passenger seat, the home security app glowing in my hand. I could see every corner of my house, the empty porch, the tidy kitchen, the gloomy basement stairs. At 2:17 p.m., the motion alert chimed. My hand tightened around the phone. On the porch camera, I watched a figure approach, the stranger, Luther. He was just as I remembered from the window, tall, thin, arms covered in faded tattoos. He glanced around before kneeling at the garden gnome, the one that hid my spare key. My heart hammered in my chest as he retrieved it in seconds, like he'd done it 100 times. He moved to the back door and slid the key in. The kitchen camera captured him stepping inside, wiping his feet on the mat like a polite guest. The sight would have been funny if it wasn't so chilling. I flicked to the next feed. Luther walked straight through the kitchen, barely pausing to glance at the family photos on the wall. Photos of Brian as a boy, standing with Julie at Crater Lake, his hair sun-bleached, both of them grinning. Luther didn't see the memories. He only saw the path to the basement. My phone vibrated again. A second figure entered through the back. Brian. My son. My own flesh and blood, moving through my home with a practiced nervousness. He pulled his hood lower, then scanned the kitchen like a stranger. For a moment, he hesitated by the fridge. I remembered how he'd raided for orange soda and leftovers as a teenager, laughing as Julie scolded him for leaving crumbs everywhere. Now Brian looked older, leaner, the spark in his eyes replaced by something desperate and hollow. I could barely breathe. On the basement feed, Luther reached the wooden steps first, testing each one before trusting it with his weight. Brian followed close behind, glancing back as if afraid I'd materialize in the doorway. The camera caught them descending, two shadows in the faint glow of the single bulb I'd left burning on purpose. They reached the furnace, the one Julie and I had argued about replacing for years. Luther dropped to his knees and started prying up the floorboards, right where Brian had said the money would be. Brian hovered, wringing his hands, muttering instructions. The audio wasn't perfect, but I heard enough. Hurry up, man. He'll be back soon. Just grab it and let's go. Luther worked quickly, his fingers sure and practiced. In less than a minute, he found the first bundle, plastic wrapped, exactly as I'd left it. He let out a low whistle and pulled more from the hiding spot. Brian stuffed the cash into a black duffel, glancing at his watch every few seconds. From the kitchen feed, I saw a shadow move past the window outside. A neighbor walking her dog. She paused, looked at my house, then moved on. For a second, I prayed she noticed something wrong and called the cops. But she kept going. Back in the basement, the duffel was nearly full. Brian straightened, sweat on his forehead, his chest heaving. For a brief moment, he looked right into the camera, as if searching for a ghost. I wondered if he saw his own reflection and recognized what he'd become. Luther zipped the bag and stood. "Let's move," he said. "We're good." Suddenly, a new voice cut through the feed. "Portland Police! Stay where you are!" My friend Walter had kept his promise. Officers flooded down the basement steps, guns drawn, voices calm but firm. Luther froze, eyes wide. Brian raised his hands, the duffel dropping to the floor with a heavy thud. I watched it all unfold from the cramped cab of my truck, my heart pounding, my throat raw with relief and sorrow. The officers cuffed both men, read them their rights, and started taking statements. Brian kept glancing up at the camera, his face a mix of shock and heartbreak. I knew that look. I'd seen it when he broke his arm as a boy, when Julie died, when I refused him money the last time. But this time, there would be no comforting words, no warm embrace. The damage was done. After the officers cleared the house, Walter called me. "It's over, Tom. We've got everything on tape. They won't be able to talk their way out of this." I thanked him, my voice barely steady. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the rain streaking the windshield, thinking about the road that led us here. I never imagined it would end like this. But some lessons, I realized, are written in pain and consequence, and sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that finally set you free. By the time I stepped through my own front door, the house already felt different. The police had finished their work, dusting for fingerprints, bagging the evidence, securing the duffel stuffed with my life's savings. My phone still buzzed every few minutes with motion alerts, though now it was only uniformed officers or the steady trickle of investigators coming and going. The kitchen smelled faintly of wet coats and coffee. I paused at the foot of the basement stairs, the same steps I'd watched on my phone just hours before. Down there, the floorboards sat askew, cash bundles scattered across the cold concrete. It was surreal to see everything so exposed, like the very heart of my home had been cracked open, its secrets laid bare for strangers to judge. Upstairs, I found Walter standing by the window, his broad frame blocking the afternoon light. He looked at me with the quiet understanding of an old friend who'd seen too much. "You did what you had to do, Tom," he said gently. "I wish it hadn't come to this." I nodded, too tired to argue. "I never thought I'd see my son in handcuffs. Never thought it'd be my call that put him there." Walter patted my shoulder. "You gave him every chance. Sometimes people need to face consequences before they can change." We drank black coffee at my kitchen table, saying little. My mind kept drifting, memories of Brian as a boy, his laughter echoing down these very halls. I thought of Julie, how she'd scolded him for skipping chores, how she always believed he'd grow out of his wild streak. I wondered what she'd say now. Would she forgive me? Would she have called the police herself, or stood in the driveway begging them to let her son go? Eventually, Walter stood, his badge heavy at his side. "I'll be in touch, Tom. Detective Foster will handle the official report. We've got everything we need, video, audio, the works. It's an open and shut case." After he left, the house fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I wandered from room to room, checking the windows, resetting the cameras, tidying the scattered papers on the kitchen counter. Everything felt both painfully familiar and permanently changed. I paused at the old piano, its keys yellowed by age, and ran a finger over the dust. Brian had taken lessons for 3 years before giving up, but Julie always played on Sundays. Her favorite song was Moon River. I remembered how she'd hum it softly, even on the days she was too tired to sing. I sat for a long while, staring at the family photo on the mantel. There we all were, the 3 of us at Cannon Beach, wind in our hair, sand between our toes. Julie, radiant as ever, her arms wrapped around Brian, his cheeks still round with childhood. Me, looking younger, stronger, full of hope for the future. I traced the glass, remembering that afternoon, the way Brian had chased seagulls, his laughter rising above the crashing surf. Now, all that seemed impossibly far away. My phone rang, jolting me back. It was Detective Foster, his tone brisk but not unkind. "Mr. Thompson, we've finished processing the scene. Your money's secure. We'll keep the house under patrol for the next few days in case anyone tries to return." I thanked him, my voice hollow. "And Brian?" "He and the other suspect, Luther Grant, are in holding. We'll be questioning them tomorrow. There's enough evidence to press charges for conspiracy, attempted burglary, and grand theft." "I know this isn't easy, sir." I almost laughed. "No, Detective. It's not." After I hung up, I poured myself a whiskey, something I rarely did. I sat by the kitchen window, watching the rain slide down the glass, Portland's gray skies pressing in around me. I wondered what the neighbors would say when the news spread, how they'd look at me now that my own boy had tried to rob his father. But beneath the sorrow, something else flickered, something like resolve. I'd spent my life believing in hard work, honesty, and standing up for what was right, even when it cost you. That's what I tried to teach Brian, what Julie had lived every day. Maybe the lesson hadn't stuck. Maybe it had to be learned the hard way. That night, I double-checked the locks, drew the curtains, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brian's face, shocked, ashamed, and lost. My heart ached for the boy he'd been, and for the man he might still become, if only he could find his way back. But first, he'd have to pay the price. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean and shining under a pale, apologetic sun. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the empty mug in my hand, trying to decide whether to eat breakfast or just get in my truck and drive. Before long, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't know, but I recognized the area code from the Multnomah County Jail. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad?" Brian's voice was thin, stretched by exhaustion and fear. "They said I could make a call. I guess you know what happened." My mouth was dry. For a second, I almost hung up. But Julie's memory nudged me. She always believed in second chances, and the power of a hard truth told gently. "I know, son," I said quietly. "I saw the whole thing." There was silence on the line. Then, a shaky exhale. "I messed up, Dad. I really messed up. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I closed my eyes, fighting off a surge of old anger and newer grief. "Didn't mean for what, Brian? Didn't mean to steal from your own father? Or didn't mean to get caught?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. Sometimes pain is the only thing that makes the lesson stick. Brian was quiet for a long time. "I was desperate. I owed Luther. He wasn't going to let me walk away. I thought, if I could just pay him off, maybe everything would go back to normal. I never wanted to hurt you." The old ache returned, heavy as ever. "But you did hurt me. You planned it, Brian. You told that man where I kept every dollar I ever saved. You gave him the key to our family, to everything your mother and I built." He sniffled on the other end, his bravado gone. "I'm sorry, Dad. I wish I could take it back." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "I wish you could too, son. But life doesn't work like that. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." We sat in silence, the only sound the low hum of my refrigerator and the distant city traffic outside. Finally, Brian spoke again. "They said I'll get a lawyer? There's going to be a hearing. Will you come?" I hesitated, then sighed. "I'll be there, Brian. Not because I approve of what you did, but because I'm still your father." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long while. I didn't eat, just listened to the house settle around me, to the way the pipes rattled and the old fridge kicked on and off. It was the same house I'd lived in for 40 years, but now it felt like it belonged to someone else. Later that afternoon, I drove down to the police station for a meeting with Detective Foster. The building was modern, glass and steel, a world away from the small-town station I'd visited as a boy for Cub Scout field trips. Inside, everything was bright, efficient, and personal. Detective Foster greeted me with a nod, his expression careful. "Mr. Thompson, I just wanted to thank you for your cooperation. This sort of thing isn't easy." I nodded. "Nothing about it feels easy, Detective." He pushed a folder across the table. "Here's the formal statement you gave. You'll probably be called as a witness. Luther Grant's a career criminal, but your son, this is his first offense. The judge will take that into account." I flipped through the pages, my own words staring back at me in black ink. I described everything: the argument, the missing money, the surveillance, Brian's involvement. Each word felt like a nail in the coffin of the life I'd tried to build. Foster's voice softened. "Sometimes people find their way back after hitting bottom. Maybe this is what your son needs: a hard stop, a chance to see what really matters." I shook his hand and left, stepping out into the weak sunshine. As I drove home, I saw families out walking, kids riding bikes, neighbors chatting by flower beds. Life went on, unchanged by the drama that had shaken my house to its foundation. That evening, I found myself in the basement, the floorboards neatly replaced, the emergency fund back where it belonged, minus a few notes held as evidence. I sat on the steps, head in my hands, and let the tears come. They were hot and silent, years in the making. I mourned the boy Brian had been, and the man I still hoped he could become. Upstairs, I poured 2 cups of coffee, one for me and one for Julie, her picture propped by the window as always. "You always said love was stubborn," I whispered. "Maybe you were right. I'm still here. Still hoping." Words spread fast in our part of Portland. By Monday, I couldn't walk to the mailbox without running into a neighbor whose eyes lingered a little longer than usual, questions in their glances they didn't dare ask aloud. At the grocery store, Mrs. Rees from 2 houses down stopped me in the produce aisle, her voice gentle. "Tom, I heard about Brian. I just want you to know we're thinking of you." I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you, Maria. It's been a rough week." She squeezed my arm, kindness softening the awkward moment. "He's a good boy at heart. Maybe this is what he needed." That was the refrain I heard all week. Good boy at heart. It's just a mistake. He'll come around. But every night when I locked up and wandered through the quiet house, I saw only the hard facts. Brian had betrayed me. Not in a moment of panic, but in weeks of careful planning, with full knowledge of what it would cost. On Thursday, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Pastor Gray, from our local church, standing on my porch with a pie in his hands and worry on his face. "Mind if I come in, Tom?" I shrugged and let him inside. We sat at the kitchen table. So many important conversations in my life had started in this spot. He poured us both coffee, then let silence settle between us before finally speaking. "The congregation's praying for your family, Tom. Sometimes it takes the harshest winter for the roots to grow stronger." I stared at the swirling steam above my cup. "I thought I did everything right, Pastor. I worked, I saved, I tried to teach him to stand on his own. But somewhere along the way, I lost him." He shook his head, his voice steady. "You can't carry all the blame. Kids make their own choices, no matter how well you raise them. Your job is to keep loving him, but to let him carry the weight of what he's done." I wanted to argue, but the words caught in my throat. Maybe the truth was, I'd always believed love could fix anything, that if I tried hard enough, worked long enough, forgave big enough, I could patch any crack in our lives. But the hole Brian had dug was too deep for either of us to climb out of overnight. That weekend, I got a letter from Brian. It was written in blue pen, the handwriting shaky but unmistakably his. "Dad, I don't know how to start this. Sitting in this cell, I keep thinking about all the times you helped me, bailing me out of trouble, letting me come home when things got rough, trusting me when nobody else would. I took it all for granted. I thought the world owed me something, and I convinced myself you'd always be there to pick up the pieces. I know you're disappointed. I don't blame you if you can't forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I don't know what's going to happen to me now, but I promise, if I ever get another chance, I'll try to be the son you deserve. Love, Brian." I read the letter twice, then a third time. My heart hurt, but for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope, faint and trembling, but real. Maybe he really was starting to see. Maybe consequences had finally cracked open the door for change. Still, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I wrote back, my words plain and steady, the way Julie would have. "Brian, there's nothing you can say that will undo what you did. Trust, once broken, is hard to fix. But you're still my son. That won't ever change. I hope you use this time to figure out who you want to be. If you're willing to work for it, there's a way back. But you'll have to prove it, not with words, but with your actions. Dad." When I mailed the letter, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not quite. But acceptance, the start of healing, slow and hard one. That night, as I locked up and checked the cameras one last time, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a survivor, and maybe even a father who'd found the courage to do what was right. A month passed, then another. Spring eased into early summer, and the world outside my window grew green and loud with birds again. Life returned to its ordinary routines: quiet breakfasts, coffee with neighbors, fixing the old fence out back. And yet, nothing was quite the same. I visited Brian once at the county jail. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not Walter, not Pastor Gray, not even Maria Ruiz. I just drove across the river, parked in the visitor's lot, and signed my name at the window. The waiting room was full of people just like me, mothers, fathers, aunts and uncles, each of us weighed down by the same mixture of shame and stubborn hope. When Brian came out, he looked thinner, older, his hair grown shaggy and his eyes heavy with regret. For a long moment neither of us spoke. He just sat across the glass, his hands pressed flat on the little metal counter. I remembered the day he was born, how tiny he looked in my arms, the way Julie had laughed and cried at the same time. That felt like a different life. "Hi, Dad," Brian said, his voice rough but clear. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my throat. "How are you holding up?" He shrugged. "It's not fun. But it's honest. I got a job in the laundry room, and I'm talking to the counselor every week." He hesitated, searching my face for something, anger, maybe, or forgiveness. "They say I might get out in a year, if I do everything right." There were so many things I wanted to say, so many questions, so many words that didn't seem big enough for what had happened. Instead, I kept it simple. "You keep doing what's right, Brian. You get another chance, you make something of it." He blinked, and for a second, I saw a trace of that boyish hope I remembered. "I will, Dad. I swear it. I'm sorry I let you down." I let the silence stretch. Finally, I leaned forward. "I can't change the past. Neither can you. All we can do is move forward." After our visit, I drove home the long way, taking the old roads Julie and I used to wander on weekends. I stopped at our favorite overlook above the city, the one with the wooden fence and the wildflowers growing in the cracks. For a long time, I sat on the hood of my truck and watched the city shimmer in the afternoon sun. I thought of Julie, and how she would have handled all of this: her strength, her stubborn optimism, her belief that nobody was ever too far gone to find their way back. Life after betrayal isn't about forgetting, it's about finding the courage to love again, even if it's a little more guarded than before. I started volunteering at the local food bank. Pastor Gray introduced me to a few other retirees, and soon I was spending my Thursdays stacking cans and sharing coffee with folks who'd seen their share of hard times. The work gave me purpose, a reason to get out of bed, a reminder that everyone, no matter their story, could still make a difference. Brian's letters kept coming, some short, some long, each one a little more hopeful than the last. He wrote about his job, about the books he was reading, about the classes he'd signed up for. He asked about the house, about the neighborhood, even about the old furnace in the basement. I answered every letter, careful and honest. I told him about the garden, about the neighbors, about the things Julie used to say when life got tough. "Keep your hands busy, your heart open, and your head up." When his release date finally came, Brian stood on the front porch, a duffel bag at his feet and uncertainty in his eyes. I let him in. There were rules, of course, boundaries I'd never let slip again. But there was also forgiveness, and a slow, stubborn hope that this time, things could be different. We ate dinner together that night, just the two of us. Afterward, we sat on the back steps, listening to the sound of distant traffic and the first crickets of summer. The air was heavy with the scent of cut grass and blooming roses. "Thanks, Dad," Brian said quietly, "for giving me another chance." I rested my hand on his shoulder, feeling the bones under my fingers, the tension and promise in his posture. Everybody gets one, son. What matters is what you do with it. As darkness fell, I realized the house felt whole again, not the same as before, but whole in a new way, patched together with forgiveness, hard lessons, and love that refused to die. I thought of Julie and smiled, sure that somewhere, somehow, she was proud. Sometimes, being a father means doing the hardest thing. Sometimes, it means opening the door again,